Welcome to Executive Leaders Radio, your spot in the corner office, the radio show where executives share their secrets to success. Executive Leaders Radio.
You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio, broadcasting from the law offices of Obermeyer in Greater Philadelphia. This is your host, Herb Cohen, with my co-host, Shannon Lane, Newmark Knight Frank, Drew Hanlon, Brad Fowle, Social First Bank, Matthew Shapiro, Obermeyer, and David DiStefano. We have a great lineup of guests for you on our show today. Mr. Matthew Shapiro, please give us the rundown.
We have a great show coming today, Herb. We have Chris Moen, Chief Medical Officer of the Choroideremia Research Foundation. We have Chris Henry, CEO of Cenero. Michele, Christina, the co-owner of Brownfield Redevelopment Solutions. And Lita, Abele, President and CEO of U.S. Lumber.
Excellent. Let's get to know our first guest, Chris Moen, Chief Medical Officer. What's the name of this foundation?
The Choroideremia Research Foundation.
What is that?
Choroideremia is a rare inherited genetic disease that causes progressive vision loss and blindness in an estimated 6,000 people in the U.S.
Okay. What's your role in this organization?
I'm former president and now chief medical officer.
And what's this disease all about?
Choroideremia is, as I mentioned, a rare genetic disease. It causes progressive symptoms that start with night blindness and small blind spots in the peripheral vision, which eventually get larger and coalesce to form what we call tunnel vision, and eventually develop total blindness by the 50s or 60s, and there's no treatment for the disease. And
you're a medical doctor?
I am, and I'm also a patient with choroideremia.
Huh. Interesting. Where were you from originally?
From a suburb of Philadelphia.
How many brothers and sisters?
One older brother.
And what was going on with you as a kid?
I feel like I was a fairly normal kid. I played sports, had a really interest in school, particularly a great interest in science.
And how about that thing that happened with the advocacy and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so after my parents told me about the eye disease that I had, they got more involved in advocacy. And when I was 15, decided to have a family meeting at the University of Pennsylvania with the goals of having a number of my family members donate blood samples to identify the genetic mutation in my family. At that meeting, I got offered the opportunity to volunteer with a world-leading genetic researcher, Gene Bennett, to work on those exact blood samples in a summer internship.
So you, you were attracted to this world of science and doing this research, it sounds like.
Science was really interesting to me, but this was not something I was expecting. I mean, it was the opportunity of a lifetime, and I took it.
Why was it the opportunity of a lifetime? What do you mean?
I was a 15-year-old kid living in the suburbs. I probably would have been cutting grass that summertime. But it gave me the chance to learn scientific research and to be able to support my family and those of us that had the disease.
Matthew?
Chris, you said it's a genetic disease, and you just referenced people in your family. Is there someone before you in your family who has CRF?
My grandfather had it. My mother was a carrier, and there's about 25 members in the extended
So when you
family.
were a kid, was your grandfather around? Was he part of your life?
Of course. He lived close to me, about half an hour
What
away.
did you do with him?
My grandfather was fairly visually impaired as a young child and inevitably totally blind. So, we would visit him quite frequently. We spent Sunday dinners at the house, but he didn't feel comfortable really leaving very much.
So did you help him leave the house sometimes?
Sometimes. In fact, I ended up being the person that would guide him and be his sighted guide if we were, in his home or out in public or at a relative's home.
Chris, did your grandfather speak about going blind?
No, almost never.
Why not?
I think he felt a lot of guilt. I think he felt a lot of shame. And, people at that time didn't really like talking about disabilities and bringing it out in public.
And how did that make you feel?
I chose to take a different path. I mean, I love my grandfather, but in some ways I don't want to be like him. I want to go out and talk about this and explain what it's like and try to use that opportunity to drive research and develop treatments.
And where did that courage come from?
Probably from my parents and having a supportive home and a lot of love and respect among my family.
It seems like you've been able to take challenges and turn them right around. Is that true?
A lot of people with disabilities face the same challenge that I do, which is you can either allow your disability to define you or you can define yourself in spite of that, and that's really the approach that I've taken. My parents supported us, with my brother and I, with the idea that we could do whatever we wanted in our lives, independent of what those obstacles are.
David?
Pretty obvious.
So I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper. Why was it important to you to do this, to speak out and be different than your grandparents?
Because there are 7,000 rare diseases in the world, and nobody knows you exist unless you speak out and you identify researchers or scientists that are interested in taking on your cause.
Brad? Brad?
Chris, talk a little bit about your mom, and what she instilled in you when you were growing up.
We lived in a really supportive household. My mother was very loving, but she also had great expectations of my brother and I, and she drove us pretty hard. We were expected not to bring home B's from the house, and instilled a great work ethic.
And how does that equate to what you're doing now?
I think very similarly, I continue to be very driven, and I want to have success in whatever I do, whether it's being, as a professional or as a parent, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm. Shannon?
Chris, you mentioned you played a lot of sports growing up. Which one was your favorite?
Wrestling was definitely my favorite.
Why?
I think, that one-on-one competition, the internal drive that you had to have to succeed really spoke to me.
And in the green room, you mentioned that you were a captain as a sophomore. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I was a 4-year starter in high school and a 3-year captain. It was an interesting scenario because my older brother, was also on the team, and they chose me as a captain instead of him.
What happened when that occurred?
There was a little interesting dynamic in the household, and so it furthered my belief in the fact that individuals should lead by example and not by voice, and so I took that as an opportunity to demonstrate leadership by what I would do on the mat and what I would do in practices, working hard and dedicating myself.
And how does that relate to your running CRF today?
It's very, very in a very similar fashion. There are very few people that know about this disease around the world, which includes scientists. So we as patient advocates need to not only speak out, but we need to learn about the disease. And I mean to sometimes a very granular level about what's happening on the molecular level so that we can speak on the same level of the scientists and be able to tell our story and engage them in a way that helps them to get interested and start performing research on.
Chris, what role does your wife play in your life?
A tremendous role, actually. She's, the most important person in my life, and she's a tremendous amount of support from me.
What are you talking about?
Well, we're both very engaged professional people, but I think it's safe to say that we respect and drive each other to be more successful. We live a very loving and supportive household with 4 children, and it's been a great ride.
Mm-hmm. What's the best part of your job?
Being able to make a difference for others. It's somewhat cliche for physicians to say that they want to help others, but really that's at its core what I want to do. I want to be able to walk away at the end of the day and feel like I've made a difference in somebody's life.
Right.
Alyssa, what words would you use to describe your husband?
I would say love and compassion, first and foremost. He truly puts people's needs of others ahead of himself.
And what does it mean to you to see him face a challenge like this with such courage?
It's both inspiring and just excruciatingly difficult.
Why, when you say it's difficult, why?
It's difficult because you're watching someone you love and you care about deeply go through daily struggles, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And how inspiring is your husband to your children?
I always say it's almost a silver lining. We have 4 young boys, and they grow up having an incredible role model as a father, but also having somebody who has the challenges of facing a daily disability. Our kids are seeing it firsthand, and the hope is, and the silver lining is, that our kids are more compassionate because of that.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, wasn't there some observation you made in the green room earlier?
Yeah, Chris, when we first started talking before, you described yourself as a bookworm, which I found a little bit funny given your wrestling history, and you were obviously quite a good wrestler. Explain that contradiction to me.
I'd like to think that I'm an athletic nerd. I have a great interest in knowledge and a continued interest in knowledge today. But I think at its core, it's the ability to continue to achieve, to continue to succeed, whether it's in academics, whether it's in sports, or in life in general.
What did you like to read when you were a kid?
Particularly nonfiction books. I'm a sports nut, so reading about athletes and how they were able to be successful.
And earlier you said there was a particular book about Walter Payton that you liked. What'd you like about that book?
It was a book called Sweetness, actually, and it told his life and his life story and how he was able to overcome obstacles and achieve.
Chris, what would you tell a kid that was maybe facing a tough challenge? What would your recommendation be?
Again, I think to not look at the obstacle that's in front of you, but look beyond that. Again, you can allow your obstacles and your challenges to stand in your way and to define who you are, but there's more to you than that. And so it's important to look inside of you and determine who you want to be, regardless of what those challenges are.
And what have your kids taught you?
Way too much, I would say. Patience is that? Yeah, patience would be a tremendous thing. But it's interesting to see them show compassion and how they've just become accustomed to living with a father who's disabled, and it's normal to them. We walk out in public in the dark, and they hand me their arm just instinctively, and I think they're learning a different level of compassion and support that I think other families don't, simply because of the way that we have to live our lives.
Chris, what's the website address for this organization, CRM?
It's the curechm.org.
Let me have that again.
curechm.org.
You've been speaking with Chris Moen, Chief Medical Officer of CRM here on Executive Leaders Radio. We'll be back in a moment right after this break. Want help building your business with help from this show's CEOs? Our CEOs can help you uncover more opportunities, grow your sales, connect you, help you raise money, all the big issues, because our CEOs have been there and done that. They've succeeded in creating millions of jobs and earning millions of dollars, and some are available to advise you. Now, email mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. That's mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. The same CEOs you've heard on the show for 10 years may be willing to help you build your business, uncover new opportunities, grow your sales, connect you, help you raise money, all the big issues, because our CEOs have been there and done that, succeeding in creating millions of jobs and earning millions of dollars. And some are available to advise you. Now, email mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. That's mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Chris Henry, CEO of Cenero. Chris, what is Cenero? What are you guys doing?
Cenero, we're a service-focused audiovisual, unified communication, and IT solutions company providing services primarily to Fortune 3,500 companies.
And how large or how small is this organization?
We're approaching 250 people.
250 people. Wow. How'd you get a job with this company?
Started it.
You started this business. And how many brothers and sisters do you have?
One younger brother and one younger sister.
So you're the oldest of three. Drew.
So you told us in the green room your dad was a pastor, correct?
That is correct.
What was that like?
It's in many ways a very positive experience. Some of the challenges with it is you move around a lot. Having moved probably, 7-8 times every 3 or 4 years.
And how did that impact you?
It forces you to learn how to make friends, how to engage with folks, how to get along.
And how did that experience affect your leadership style?
My belief is that emotional intelligence is probably the most important characteristic you can have as both a leader and really even as an employee. But that's something you can develop and you can learn.
Didn't you mention earlier that there was a downside of your dad being a pastor where you got used as an example? What was that all about?
Well, I mean, if you're a child and your dad's using you as an example, sometimes that can be very embarrassing, and you learn how to.
So Dad's up on the pulpit and he's giving a sermon about something.
A sermon and something my son Chris did so and so, and it's like you're shaking in your boots.
So did that make you rebellious? Did that make you resentful, or did that make you understand how to lead by example?
Both, all three. Eventually it becomes a positive. At the time, it probably didn't feel like that.
So you sort of learned about respect, didn't you, at a young age?
That's correct. Yeah, you learn to respect. And again, it's a part of being growing your emotional intelligence, being able to identify with people and understand their perspective.
Chris, in the green room, you mentioned that you were involved in a lot of sports. Which one was your favorite?
Wrestling.
Why?
It's a very challenging sport. It requires dedication, a lot of effort, and at the same time, whether you're really good or really not good, there's a respect that you have for your opponent and your teammates and the like. That it's almost like a larger family. Really.
And how does that relate to you being CEO and running Cenero?
Actually, really very similar. It's team building, you're cheerleading, you're leading by example, you're all of those skill sets that you develop in any sport, but especially in something like wrestling.
Brad?
Chris, you're talking about team building and leading. What was your relationship with your siblings like when you grew up? Because you moved around a lot.
We were very close. We lived a lot in the country, and so siblings really became best friends. So.
And what was your role with them?
Really probably a leader, building tree houses, climbing ropes, and digging holes.
And you've taken that to your company, building your company?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a formulative development of your personality, and again, that the leadership style and leading by example and being able to have that emotional intelligence to identify and have a perspective, an employee's perspective or a client's perspective. I mean, that's a very important skill.
Chris, tell us about your mom.
Very strong woman, very loving, very caring, but not overly protective. So you're allowed to fall.
And when I asked you earlier whether you were more like your mom or dad, you deferred and said
my grandfather.
And why'd you pick your grandfather?
Very similar personality. I think we have a lot of the same traits.
And what do you bring from your grandfather to work every day with you?
He grew up out in the middle of nowhere and wound up getting a PhD, and so resilience, hard work, coming out of extremely poor to turning himself into a very successful person.
And how does that play in who you are today?
It's just a great role model and a great example, right?
Chris, did your grandfather come watch you wrestle?
No, because he had a bad heart. I asked him that, and he said he would love to, but he was worried that he was going to have a heart attack.
How about mom and dad?
Every match. Yeah.
What did that mean to you to look over and see your mom and dad?
I probably didn't appreciate it at the time because you're so focused on.
How about when you look back now, though?
I mean, it just, I think, reflective of the type of family that we had and the support structure to be able to.
Has that inspired the culture at your work at all?
I like to think so, yes.
Chris, if we take you back to high school and I ask you what the most memorable match you had was, most memorable meet, which one is it?
I was very successful in high school. I almost remember none of my victories, but I can tell you every match exactly what happened and the score when I lost.
Why is that?
I think you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your victories.
And do you bring that? How does that play out in your business today?
Exactly the same way. I mean, you learn from your mistakes rather than your victories.
Chris, playing on the same line, you've talked about EQ a couple times. Mm-hmm. Go back to that same time period. When did you first realize that emotional intelligence mattered as a concept?
I wouldn't have known to call it emotional intelligence, but when you're leading a team, if you're a captain and you're involved in that, the way you interact with people, the cheerleading, again, wrestling can be a very it's a tough sport. When you lose, somebody's going to hurt you.
Does it take more time to be?
Yeah, and you have to go, and you want to. They lose, and you want to help pick them up. You want to build them back up again, so that they, learn from it.
Okay,
right now, it's really the message.
Chris, you said something in the green room that you learned from your father, who's a pastor, about people wanting to believe in something bigger. Mm-hmm. Talk about that, and does that play into your company? I
think it's part of our core values, which are very important to our company and how we grow, and it's really the thing that allows us to grow like we have. I believe that humans have an innate need to believe or be part of something bigger than themselves.
And you picked that up from your dad?
Yeah, I think so. My faith and how I grew up. Yes.
When you said that, I was watching you, and you put your hand over your heart. Tell us about that.
Well, it could be religious, but I think it also applies as a company. Right? I mean, being a one-person consulting firm is very different than being part of a team and building a legacy, building an organization, and that's a family, and people can believe in that and what they do if you do it right.
All right. Do you see yourself retiring someday?
I would like to.
Would you really?
At some point.
But couldn't you financially retire now if you wanted to?
Yes.
So why don't you?
It's about leading a team, and we haven't accomplished what we want to do. And at this point, I'm an engineer by training. So instead of engineering products, we're engineering companies, and we're growing people. So it's
wait.
about
If you
building
could
and
financially retire, what time do you start with your emails in the morning? Come on,
this morning,
tell us
4
the truth.
a.m.
Okay, so you're up at 4 a.m. playing on email. What time do you go to sleep at night and stop thinking about the business?
You never stop thinking about it.
Okay, so you're 24 by 8 in terms of this business, and you think it's fun, even though you're not retiring, so you must enjoy it. What are you enjoying about it?
There's lots of stress. Most certainly, but the positives when you succeed and you see people succeed and grow. We believe in promoting from within and watching the growth of somebody that starts.
When you were a kid, and you
rewarding.
were on that wrestling team, what was your role on that team?
I was a captain for 2 years.
Is there a similarity between your role as captain and how you felt, and you're playing CEO nowadays and how you feel?
I think it's probably a direct relationship.
What are you talking about? How's it a direct relationship?
Again, you're team building. You're lifting people up. You're trying to grow them, help them get better.
So you don't like to lose. You like a winning team. Matthew, what are you thinking?
I want to know where the child and grandchild of a pastor gets the entrepreneurial spirit.
Part of it is when, if you believe in something bigger than yourself, it reduces fear.
Was your dad involved with starting congregations or building congregations?
Both, I believe.
You think you're like your dad in terms of his entrepreneurial ability?
They never did anything entrepreneurial, but I believe that probably that might be in the blood.
Yeah, they're pulling together a group around the vision. What's the website address for this organization known as Cenero? What's your website address?
It's Cenero, Cenero.com.
We've been speaking with Chris Henry, CEO of Cenero, here on Executive Leaders Radio. Don't forget to visit our website, executiveleadersradio.com, learn more about our executive leaders. We'll be back in a moment, right after this break. Back, you're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Michele Christina, co-owner of Brownfield Redevelopment Solutions. Michele, what is Brownfield Redevelopment Solutions?
It is a small consulting firm. We basically provide services to local government entities, such as helping them with contaminated properties, redevelopment, resiliency planning, energy studies.
Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from a small town in central Pennsylvania.
How many brothers and sisters?
I was the oldest of 3.
And tell me a little bit about what you were doing 8 to 14 years old. What was fun for you?
I spent my summers, always had to have a summer at Girl Scout camp. It was a week to 2 weeks away. We stayed in tents, cabins, did backpacking, canoeing, always outside.
So what'd you like about that?
I just loved being outside. I loved staying kind of in a tent. Loved being around trees and with birds and outdoors.
What's that have to do with what you're doing nowadays?
A lot of what we started the company because we were focusing on helping the environment, basically cleaning up these urban sites for redevelopment.
Drew.
Michele, what was mom and dad like?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My mom is a very intelligent woman, very high Q. My dad worked for my grandfather in the family business.
And what was that like?
Oh, wow. It was different than, I think, what I'm doing. My mom, I think, being so smart and staying at home and being a housemaker, she got to the point where, my brother and sister and I were old enough, she wanted to go out and work, get out of the house a little bit more, I think.
And it sounded like your grandfather was fairly demanding. Is that accurate?
Sure. I know myself and my siblings had very different relationships with my grandfather. He was at work all the time, and I know growing up, my mom and her sisters didn't see him a lot.
And what did he teach you? What do you think back? What was the lesson to be taken?
Hard work and approach things with intelligence.
Just one last question. Central Pennsylvania. What do you think about when you think of Central PA?
Oh, boy. Wrestling and beefaroni.
Shannon?
Michele, who was someone you looked up to when you were a kid?
My grandmother was somebody I always had a very good relationship with, and my aunt.
And what about your grandmother was it that you looked up to?
She was a very quiet woman, not very obtrusive, but she was very intelligent and enjoyed reading, and we would talk about books an awful lot.
And what did you learn from her that you carry with you today?
Oh, boy. Just how to be persistent and sometimes keeping your mouth closed and seeing what's going on is probably the best way to react to situations.
I understand that you have a lot of respect for your mom. You mentioned she was a very bright woman, and your grandmother. How does this respect for really bright women affecting you building this business?
Myself and my partner, we're 100% women-owned business. We employ a lot of women, and our business is a little bit different in that we don't have a central office where everyone reports to work. Everybody works out of their home office, and this helps women that maybe aren't looking. They're still looking to be engaged in a meaningful way in the workforce professionally, but maybe not be going to an office every day because they have small kids or pursuing a degree, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Brad?
Michele, in the green room, you talked about you started waitressing when you were 15. What was that like, and what did you do different from the other people that were doing that job?
It was a lot of hard work. I don't know that I was different than anybody else so much as I think it taught me to be organized. You'd have to keep the tables moving, and they weren't happening. The things at the tables weren't happening at the same time, so you had to look ahead and say, okay, I got to get table 4 their applesauce now.
So you weren't just waitressing, you were being really organized, balancing multiple tables?
Yeah, you had to be strategic, I think, in order to keep everybody happy.
Strategic as a waitress. So how does that equate to what you do now?
It is pretty much how we run our business. We have to make sure that looking down the road, keeping a lot of tables flipping at the same time, but also make sure we get the big tip at the end.
Mm-hmm. Matthew?
You said earlier that what you're doing is different from the family business you grew up watching. Tell me what you're doing that's different.
The family business, it was my grandfather, my grandmother, my great-uncle, my father, my uncle worked in it, and it was a trucking business, and they had a totally different approach than what we do. What we do is much more cohesive and collaborative in nature. We have a team approach to projects, whereas everybody had their own role there, and they were kind of isolated amongst themselves in the office.
Mm-hmm. David?
You mentioned a younger brother and sister. What was your relationship with them?
Sure. My brother and I were fairly close in age, and sometimes that brought some strife, as siblings will sometimes fight. My sister and I, there was a bigger age gap, probably 6-7 years. A lot of times when my mom went back to work, especially, I was responsible for my sister.
Did somebody ask you to do that?
I don't know. I think it was just kind of, that was just a role we fell into.
And how were you responsible?
Had to make sure she was, in kindergarten, first grade, had to make sure that somebody was watching her, taking care of her, feeding her.
How does that relate to what you do today?
That's kind of, I think it did provide me with some responsibility, sense of responsibility for other people to make sure everybody was taken care of and looked after.
Is it fair to say even if it's not your job responsibility, you would do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So this, I understand you were working, I think it was for the state of New Jersey or something. What do you, is that correct?
The municipality.
Yeah. But and then you decided to start this. What do you think gave you the impetus or the courage or the guts or the inclination to go start your own business?
It wasn't anything we consciously set out thinking that this was a good thing. In fact, our business ended up being totally different than what we thought it was going to be.
When you were a kid, did you have a desire to go work in your grandfather's business?
No.
Uh-huh. Did you have a desire to start your own business when you were a kid?
No, never even crossed my mind.
What do you think did it as you got older and you started this business? What was the trigger?
I think the trigger was myself and my business partner had small children at home, and we wanted to be more available for them at home, but still wanted to be engaged and stimulated, and feel that there was a sense of contributing to society.
So why did you go get a job that accommodated that?
There really isn't jobs that I think accommodate that allow that flexibility to, work at home with your kids.
So you decided to start your own business where you could work from home, but weren't you afraid you were going to have to work extended hours?
And we did, and we worked in 2 different shifts, basically, in the morning when the kids were at school, and then late at night after the kids went to bed.
But it sounds like you enjoy your work.
I do. Probably it's more important. We're very mission-driven to try and help these urban communities and provide some sort of impetus for community revitalization, and that is oftentimes much more rewarding than, the paycheck.
So you guys get to work from home, and you've got other teammates that work from home. and you're mission-driven, and it sounds like that mission-driven began to show up when you were at Girl Scout camp because you really loved the outdoors. Am I correct about that?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Where does that come from? Why weren't you a kid who didn't want to get dirty and didn't like the bugs? Who taught you to appreciate the outdoors?
Wow. I'm not sure. I mean, I know I also come from a family of very intelligent women who also were Girl Scouts. And if they could, they'd probably be outside, gardening more often than at the stove.
Mm-hmm. You have a real sense of community. I'm just curious, was that apparent in your youth? Was it community important?
Very much so. I grew up I was probably, I think, fourth generation in this very small town. My generation is the first generation to leave in a while. And
what kind of things do you remember happening in the community that were important to you?
I always was at my grandparents' house a couple of times a week. We'd have dinner with them frequently during the week. My aunt and uncle also lived in the same town. We, have dinners together, birthday celebrations.
And is that still important to you today?
Absolutely. For a while, I lived in Camden, New Jersey, because it had a lot of the same similarities as far as a sense of community. My neighbors knew who I was. They looked out for me. And that's also where I live now. It is a similar situation, a sense of community.
What would your neighbors say about you?
They said I made pretty decent food for.
That's pretty humble.
Yeah. What kind of food? What's your favorite? What's your specialty?
Yeah, beefaroni. I can open up the can really well. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that I have a specialty or.
Mm-hmm. So, what's the best part of your day?
Best part of my day is interacting with people and keeping the projects moving forward.
So you enjoy the intellectual stimulation of running your own business as well as working with the team, yet you've got the flexibility because you're able to work from home.
Right.
Uh-huh. And do you ever get together with your teammates?
Yeah, we try and have team-building exercises. We've done some things. We have a video conferencing feed that we, once a month, everybody has a staff call that we can actually see each other's faces.
Yeah.
We've been
Makes sense to me. What's the website address of your organization?
BRSinc.com.
Let me have that again.
Sure, it's BRSinc.com.
We've been speaking with Michele Christina, co-owner of Brownfield Redevelopment Solutions here on Executive Leaders Radio. Back in a moment right after this break. Want help building your business with help from this show's CEOs? Our CEOs can help you uncover more opportunities, grow your sales, connect you, help you raise money, all the big issues, because our CEOs have been there and done that. They've succeeded in creating millions of jobs and earning millions of dollars, and some are available to advise you. Now, email mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. That's mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. The same CEOs you've heard on the show for 10 years may be willing to help you build your business, uncover new opportunities, grow your sales, connect you, help you raise money, all the big issues, because our CEOs have been there and done that, succeeding in creating millions of jobs and earning millions of dollars. And some are available to advise you. Now, email mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. That's mentors@executiveleadersradio.com. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Lita Abele, who's president and CEO of U.S. Lumber. Lita, what is U.S. Lumber? What are you guys doing?
U.S. Lumber is a building material suppliers that supply lumber and plywood to the concrete construction company.
Uh-huh. Where you from originally?
Originally from the Philippines.
From the Philippines. And how many brothers and sisters?
2 brothers, 1 sister. I am the youngest.
You're the youngest of 4. And how young were you when you came to the U.S.?
28.
28. Did you come with the family or did you come alone?
Alone, by myself.
You're 28 years old. You're the youngest of 4. You grew up in the Philippines and you came to the U.S. alone at 28. Why?
Because I want to change our life around. I want to give a good future to my children, to my parents, and to myself, and to everyone in the family.
Were you planning to send money home?
Yes.
Okay, so
since I got here.
So when you came to the United States, you came alone and you were planning to send money back home. And when you came here, what kind of job did you get, and what were the working conditions like, more important?
Okay, my first job in the United States is a housekeeper, taking care of 2 old couple. Like I am their companion at the house.
So what happened? What were the working conditions like? What were the working conditions like?
The working condition is not good because they treat me like not a human being. I eat the leftover food. I cannot touch food because they will say that's money. I cannot touch a telephone because that's money. I take shower in a cold water. I sleep in a tent. I sleep like 4 layers of my clothes.
Drew?
Lita, I just want to step back here for a second. So when you were younger, you were dreaming about the United States, correct?
Correct.
And what were you dreaming about? What were you thinking about?
I'm thinking about a good life because I heard that United States is a land of opportunity. And if you work like a babysitter, you earn money. And the equivalent of like $1 to a pesos is big difference.
So when you finally get here, the first experience you had was not so great, correct?
Yes.
And what kept you fighting?
It kept me fighting because I have to think about my children, my parents, my brothers, sisters, and myself.
And where did that courage come from, just to keep on moving forward?
Because we are poor, and if you are poor, people that is rich always look down to you. So I doesn't want to have that anymore. I doesn't want my children to experience that.
So even though that first experience wasn't great, you knew there was still a better way?
Yes.
What kind of revenue were you guys? What kind of customers do you have now?
The kind of customers we have is a general construction company that build buildings.
Who are some of your customers? Who are some of your customers?
Madison Construction, Hililong, Petrini and Son, Mumford and Miller, Driscoll.
So you've got major
PKM.
customers on one hand coming here and feeling like you were a slave and not being treated properly, and now you're running a business with some pretty substantial customers. Brad, what are you thinking?
Taking back, you said you were poor. When you were in the Philippines, what did your mom and dad do, and what was it like growing up?
My mom and dad work. My adopted parents work both, and my parents stay home. My real father is a farmer.
Didn't you mention that you grew up in a small community and mom and dad gave you to your aunt and uncle where they adopted you?
Yes.
And why did they adopt you?
Because they don't have children, and they see I'm a girl, so they said, "Oh, can we have her?"
Didn't you feel abandoned because of that situation?
No, because I grew up in a loving family. I have 2 mothers, I have 2 fathers that really loves me, and they are very loving parents.
How's that affecting you nowadays? In terms of what you're interested in doing, because the fact that you felt very safe as a child. In terms of the way you treat, is your family involved in your business?
Yes.
How many folks in your family are involved in your business?
5 or 6.
Like, who are they?
My daughter, my son-in-law, my nephew, my niece, and formerly my son.
So you've got you really felt like you grew up in a tight family, and you're recreating that family in your business nowadays. It sounds like. Matthew? You were a young dreamer, and tell us a little bit about when you were dreaming as a kid. What were you dreaming about?
I am dreaming about like good things, like I never wear a suit, and when I see a woman dressed in a suit, and I said, when I'm going to be wearing a suit. So I'm dreaming about that.
You were dreaming about what? Wearing a suit?
Yeah, wearing a suit, be a boss, like what you see in the TV.
Instead of what? Instead of being what?
Instead of just being a housewife or just being just a worker. So I'm dreaming I want to be a boss someday.
So, Shannon, where's your head at?
In the green room, you mentioned you wanted to make sure to recognize your husband. Why is that important to you?
To recognize my husband is very important to me because he's the one who gave the opportunity to where I am now. He brought me to the business. He taught me a little bit of the business. And most of what I learned and what I know now is a self-taught.
David?
You mentioned that when you joined your husband's company at the time, it was about $2 million in revenue, and today it's 5 times that large. How did you do that?
Because my husband and I, in the beginning, when he is semi-retired, we are teaming up. It's like we are going out on the road. He drive, I go and solicit the business. And then I always tell to our client, I don't know the technicalities of lumber, but I know the terminology. So when a customer asks me, what is that kind of plywood, where we can use that, I'm going to say, hold on 1 second, I have a salesman with me. So I will call my husband, but we don't introduce each other as is my husband.
So you were the spirit. You were the spirit of the company, the driving force.
Yes.
How did you meet your husband?
I met my husband in Boston. I was there with a friend, and we are in Hilton to eat dinner, and he's there too.
Cool. You're really great. It really sounds to me like
I am standing waiting for our table. He's standing waiting for his table, and he kept looking at me, and I caught him by the side of my eye. And then when I look at him, he will turn around. When he look at me, I will look at him, he turn around. The third one, I smile, he smiled, then he come over, he introduced himself.
So this business, how are you planning to retire someday? Are you planning to sell the business one day?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What's the future looking like for this business?
The future is we want my kids to run the business because they are involved now. But I don't know how deep they want to get involved.
Mm-hmm. But you really feel this truly is a family business where everybody's involved in the business.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Chris, what are you thinking?
Lita, I'd like to know how your background when you were growing up built a resiliency. When you moved to the country when you're 28 years old, you had to be some fear. How did you overcome that?
It is just my dream, and I make up my mind. I have to be in the United States. I have to work in order for me to change my life around and give a good life to my children.
How did you know about the United States? I mean, you're in the Philippines.
You seen on television, you seen in movie, you heard about it. Like people from our town will come. We call that balikbayan, and they will be like showing what they have, things like that. So.
Mm-hmm. So you were watching and you were seeing stuff on television in the media, and you decided you wanted that? You wanted that future?
Yes, I want to. It's just the purpose of coming to the United States is to change my life around and my family and my children.
And your intention in coming here was to send money back home as well as to start a family here?
Yes, yeah. Send money, yes. Uh-huh. Every penny that I earn in the very beginning, I send it there. And I also have my brother and sister send their children to school. And then when they are finished, I bring them here.
Mm-hmm. What's the website address for this organization?
USLumberInc.com.
US Lumber Inc. or USLumber.com?
USLumberInc.com.
Uh-huh. And has the United States fulfilled your dreams?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Let me have the website address one more time.
USLumberInc.com.
We've been speaking with Lita Abele, President and CEO of US Lumber, here on Executive Leaders Radio. And Matthew, will you please give us the rundown on who we've had on the air today, please?
Sure will. It's been a great show. We started with Chris Moen, the Chief Medical Officer of Choroideremia Research Foundation.
What was the name of that organization, please?
Choroideremia Research Foundation. We had Chris Henry, the CEO of Cenero, Michele Christina, who is the co-owner of Brownfield Development Solutions, and we just wrapped it up with Lita Abele, the President and CEO of US Lumber.
I would like to thank my co-hosts, including Shannon Lane, Newmark Knight Frank, Drew Hanlon, Brad Faust, Ocean First Bank, our quite literate Matthew Shapiro from Obermeyer, and David DeStefano. He's literate too. Don't forget to visit our website, executiveleadersradio.com, to learn more about our executive leaders. I'd like to thank my co-hosts for helping provide an interesting and entertaining show. I'd like to thank the listening audience for listening. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a radio show. And please have a nice day. Bye-bye.